In 1974, I spent 35 hours floating in a pitch-black tank on the Malibu coast, not searching for enlightenment, but to see what would happen if a Nobel Prize-winning physicist chased real hallucinations without risking my brain on drugs. Most people avoid losing touch with reality, but I wanted to know exactly what the mind conjures in pure darkness. What I discovered inside Dr. John Lilly's isolation tank broke all my expectations, and it raised bigger questions about consciousness itself. So how did a scientist's curiosity lead me into the strangest experiment of my life? This whole adventure really started long before Malibu. Back in the late 1930s, when I was a student at MIT, I got obsessed with figuring out what actually happens when you fall asleep. I would try to catch myself at the exact moment I drifted off. Lying in bed, I watched my thoughts get more and more tangled, and sometimes it felt like I could think two things at once. I called it getting cockeyed. One night, I realized I was dreaming, and at the same time, I was watching myself dream. I had managed to stay awake right down into the dream itself. That was a wild feeling, like I had snuck into the engine room of my own mind. I kept at it for years, training myself to notice the weird edges of consciousness. But I was always careful. I love thinking too much to risk damaging my brain, and still I wanted to know what it would be like to hallucinate while wide awake, with the machine running at full power. That curiosity is what kept me going all those years. In 1974, I found myself driving up the winding roads to John Lilly's house in Malibu. Lilly was a real character, a neuroscientist with wild ideas, the kind of man who would hang neon lights in his lab and stick a giant periodic table on the wall just because. He invented the first isolation tank in 1954 at the National Institute of Mental Health. His place felt like a cross between a science lab and a magician's den. Lilly started talking about how different colors of light could influence the mind, and he had all sorts of mystical theories. I remember thinking all kinds of wiki-whack things, all kinds of gorp. I was not there for the mysticism. I just wanted to get in that tank. So I nodded along, did everything he asked, and let him walk me through the setup. The tank itself was simple. A big, dark box filled with warm salt water, soundproofed and sealed off from the world. No light, no sound. Nothing to hold on to. I figured if anything could trigger hallucinations without messing up my brain, this was it. So I agreed to try, even if I had to listen to a little gorp first. The first time I climbed into that tank, I expected something dramatic, maybe a burst of color, or at least a little weirdness. Instead, I floated there in the dark, weightless, in water warm to about 93 to 94 degrees Fahrenheit. It was so quiet, I could hear my own heartbeat. But nothing happened. My mind wandered, just like it does when you're about to fall asleep. Random thoughts, little daydreams. I figured, okay, maybe it takes a while. So I tried again. The second session was the same, just me floating in the dark, thinking about physics problems, what I wanted for dinner. I started to wonder if the whole thing was just a fancy way to take a nap. Then, one afternoon, at Lilly's place, I ran into Baba Ram Das. He listened to me complain and told me to just focus on my breathing in there, and not to try to force anything. I decided to give it a shot. That little piece of advice changed everything for me. Still with me? Good. If you're finding this fascinating, tap the like button. It helps more curious minds find these stories. So I'm floating there in the pitch-black tank, doing nothing but following my breath, when a question pops into my head. Where is my ego, really? Everyone assumes it's behind the eyes, tucked away in the brain. But I started to wonder if that's just something we're taught. Kids copy adults tapping their heads when they say, "Let me think." Maybe that's why we all feel our consciousness is up here. So I tried a little experiment. I focused on the sensation of me, that sense of being a point somewhere inside my skull. And then I nudged it. Not much at first, just an inch off center. To my surprise, it worked. I could feel my sense of self shift, just a bit to the side.
That got me curious. If I could move it an inch, why not more? I started sliding my ego downward, through my neck, into my chest. Each time I managed to push it lower, I would wait for something to happen. Then, splat, a drop of water hit my shoulder, but my sense of self was now somewhere in my chest, so the drop felt like it landed above me. It startled me so much my ego would leap right back up. I kept at it, session after session, until I got my sense of self all the way down to my loins. And every time, the water drop trick proved it. Wherever I put my ego, that is where I felt myself to be. That was the first time I realized just how slippery this whole business of self really is. The first time I managed to nudge my ego completely outside my body, it was like slipping into the audience at my own show. Suddenly, I wasn't floating in the tank anymore. I was off to one side, looking back at myself. I could feel my hands in the warm water, but somehow I also saw them resting against the back of my head, as if I was sitting just outside the tank. When I wiggled my fingers, I watched them move from this impossible angle. And here is the part that still gives me goosebumps. The movements I saw matched exactly what I was doing in real time. No lag, no confusion. Between my thumb and fingers, I could see a slice of blue sky, clear as day. My brain had stitched together a world that made perfect sense, even though I knew it couldn't possibly be real. For a moment, I believed it. That's how convincing it was. The mind is a master illusionist, and when it puts on a show, you are always in the front row. Before I tell you what happened next, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the rest of this series. One week, I got completely wrapped up in a problem about artificial intelligence. How on earth does the brain organize memories? I carried that puzzle with me into the tank. As soon as I settled in, my mind started firing off images, snapshots from all over my past, tumbling out in a wild, vivid stream. Each memory seemed to be tied to a place. My old dorm room at MIT, the kitchen in my childhood home, the physics lecture hall. I noticed that if I thought about one spot, every other memory from that same place would come rushing back. It felt like I had cracked the code. Memories are stored by location. I was so thrilled, I practically leapt out of the tank. I spent the next hour convinced I had made a real scientific discovery, a brand new insight into how the mind works. But then, as I started to test it, the excitement drained away. The whole structure unraveled. That revelation, so clear, so convincing, was just another hallucination. My brain had fooled me completely. Even after all those years of training myself to think straight, I was just as vulnerable to a mirage as anyone else. If this story made you think, leave a comment below. I'd love to know, have you ever tried to explore your own consciousness? John Lilly and I could spend hours going back and forth about what these tank experiences actually meant. Lilly was convinced the visions were real, messages from other intelligences, maybe even glimpses into other worlds. I couldn't buy it. For me, hallucinations were just that, tricks of the brain, nothing more. If I saw golden globes floating around and whispering secrets, that didn't mean I'd made contact with anything beyond myself. It just meant my mind was good at making things up. After one of my sessions, I sent Lilly a copy of my book and scribbled inside, "Thanks for the hallucinations." He wrote back, "You stopped being a scientist the instant you said that word, hallucinations." That kicked off a 14-year argument, friendly but stubborn on both sides. Neither of us ever convinced the other, but the question kept us both thinking. Where do you draw the line between reality and imagination? After all those hours floating in Lilly's tank, I figured I'd try bringing the experiment home. I turned off every light, sat quietly in my most comfortable chair, and waited for the show to start. Nothing. Not a single hallucination. It didn't matter how still I sat or how long I waited. My brain just gave me the usual background noise. That's when I started to wonder.
If it's just about shutting out the senses, why did it only work in that super-duper tank? I never cracked that puzzle. Maybe it was something about the water, or maybe just the expectation itself. What you see, it turns out, depends a lot on what you think you're supposed to see. Even today, consciousness remains the last great mystery in science. No matter how rational we are, our minds can still deceive us. As brain science advances, Feynman's experiment reminds us that exploring our own perception is as risky and as vital as exploring the universe. What would you dare to discover?